Well, we've got an hour-long presentation coming up from Tikhon Galbraith and Khara Wagner. They're going to be talking about the collective impact in food security. I'm Heidi Rader. I'm with UAF Cooperative Extension Service, and I will be your moderator. So feel free to ask your questions in the chat or pipe in towards the end with your mic and video. You guys can go ahead and get started whenever you want.
Exit full screen.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you, Charles, for exiting the full screen. That's when you came off mute right as you said that. Well, welcome, everyone. So happy to have you here. So we're excited to share with you some of our thoughts on the ability or the tool of collective impact model and how it could potentially be applied to food systems work here in the state, and how it could potentially help leverage all the assets within your community and work towards a common goal. My name is Tikhon Galbraith. I'm a technical assistant specialist with Intertribal Agriculture Council for the state of Alaska. I work with tribes and tribal producers across the state, helping to accomplish goals around food sovereignty and food security by helping to remove barriers when they exist, identifying resources when they're needed, and move whatever work is happening towards the next step when it's helpful. So happy to be here with Khara, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you. I'm Khara Wagner. I work with Homer Soil and Water Conservation District, and I have the joy of getting to work with a lot of food systems and different participants throughout those food systems, including farmers, landowners, restaurants, various folks like that, as well as, say, the wonderful organizers of this conference. So it's quite an honor to be here. And collective impact is something that has grabbed my attention for years. So I'm really excited to be presenting on it as well with Tikhon. Go ahead, Tikhon, I'll let you start.
All right, you want to do next slide? There we go. So yeah, Khara and I were just chatting about food systems really, and earlier in the spring or last fall or something, and we're both like, what tools do you use? And we both started geeking out about collective impact and its potential and how we use it in our work. So we thought, hey, let's do a presentation together. So happy to be here. And it really comes from that connection. Yes, transportation too. Food intersects with all the different sectors of our community, of our nation, right? Transportation, climate, community, healthcare, government, energy. I stopped at 5 just because it made a pretty flower, but really there are more sectors I know that are out there that it intersects with. It's a foundation of health, it's a foundation of wealth, it's a foundation of community and culture. I'm speaking to the choir. You're all here because you care about food, and I'm sure you all understand and see the many ways in which it intersects. Next slide, please. So this is just another way of looking at it. Thanks to the organization that put this together. I really just appreciate how it shows the interconnectedness of the food systems and how there are drivers and activities, actors and outcomes that are resulting in it. So when we step back and really look at food as a system, we can start to identify, the interconnectedness and how they're interconnected. So where we might want to reinforce current activities to achieve outcomes, or where we might want to limit inputs to maximize profit or maximize potential possibility, within like a smaller system, say management of a farm, or the larger system, say considering the importation of food for our state. Khara, do you have anything to add on this kind of broad scope thinking here? Khara? No? Do you have any more thoughts on this broad thinking here? I think you're muted if you're trying to speak.
I'm trying to fix my microphone. Does that sound better?
Yep, can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll let you keep going. You're hitting it on the head right there.
Okay, yeah, so just everyone eats, right? That's the bottom line. There's a need for investment in our state at all levels of our food system, support of our individual entrepreneurial small food businesses, whether it's value add or starting a micro farm, or maybe you're engaging with the cottage food industry, keeping it smaller and doing like a market garden in your own backyard if you have access to that type of land. And at the same time, there's need to really focus on the system change. Right? We experience challenges in the state as it relates to policy, both federal and state, in terms of how language is used to describe agriculture and how that is applicable, or in many cases not applicable, to the work that's happening. But to impact that change and to really identify where those opportunities for improvement exist within the language, the request for proposals, or the program eligibility requirements, we need to understand those connections as they relate to on the ground work, what it means for all of us to eat. No one should be hungry, everyone should have access to food, and what that is made up of looks very different between say Anchorage, our largest urban hub, to one of our smallest rural communities. What food security looks like in each of those places is dramatically different. And you can understand that by really looking in the freezers of the families that exist. So I'm thinking about food systems and the potential collective impact. I think a great model or consideration is food waste across the nation and within the food system. So next slide, please. So in the United States, it's estimated that 30 to 40% of the food supply is wasted. And that is largely, according to USDA economic research, 31% of that loss is at the retail and consumer levels. And so that's saying once it hits the retail stores or goes home with us as consumers, that is where the waste is primarily occurring. According to that study, I would argue, in Alaska, we all know that the food that we're receiving, while it might be in good condition or appear to be in good condition at the store, it's already been shipped and in process movement for 3 to 6 to 8 weeks, under ideal storage conditions. And so the moment we kind of shock them and bring them home off the shelves, our home shelf life is rather limited. And so it becomes challenging. So it's a highlight, to have that amount of waste is then, when you compare it to the carbon footprint or the carbon cost of that food production, it really shows that our food system isn't sustainable. It's designed in a linear structure from point A to point B, and considered in terms of calories and cost. And we really need to take a step back or reimagine food production from that systems perspective. The collective impact model is a tool or a method to help to connect disparate organizations working towards the same goal and really identify that shared vision through the individual missions and identify where the shared missions can support and drive that work towards achieving change in the larger challenges, such as food waste that we're experiencing. So others that we could consider in relation to where we can identify the unsustainability of our current food system is like the greenhouse gas emissions or transportation costs, or looking at where the profits are being realized in the food system. You know, we have ranchers and farmers who are putting in a ton of sweat equity and time and continuing to be in kind of a challenging and sometimes impoverished sort of working environment, where the slaughterhouses or the large corporations managing the distribution and sales are realizing a large portion of the profits. So you're really, these challenges are bigger than any one organization or even one government really can accomplish. With that, I'll pass it to you, Khara.
I just switched the slide because it was totally perfect what you were saying there, Tikan. Yeah, it is. It's way too big of an issue for any one group to address. And yet, as you can see by the participants in this room, there are a lot of people that are trying to address this. And like listening to Eva Burke today, I don't know how many of you were also just aflutter with just the image that she projected of what we need to do with our food system and all of these huge things that Tikan's talking about. It's like there's so much change that needs to happen, and having a whole bunch of little individual groups addressing it makes it really difficult to feel like you're getting anywhere. So collective impact is one of those structures that you can maybe reevaluate that. So I have a question for you. I'd like everybody to jump in on the chat. Give me an issue that you work with on a regular basis that you feel is super important, but it would need more participation to get moving forward. What is an issue that you work on that has to do with food systems? Throw it into the chat. Let's see what we got. School gardens, yes. And Amy's right, collaboration is key. Transportation, access to ag land, local food in school. Oh, now it's coming through. Yep, that's what I wanted to see. Perfect. Yeah, salmon habitat, huge. Training engineers to work with food producers, culturally specific in anti-hunger work. Yes, direct marketing of fish, community level emergency preparedness. Yeah, all of these things, it's all huge. It's all great. Keep it going. Food hubs, of course, Robbie, indeed. So all of these issues are things that we're all working on. They all are on that food system, that huge overarching thing. But I think it was Amy Foote said, collaboration is key. And that's what this conversation really is about, is how do you collaborate? So traditionally, we are often working as we are in our various silos, trying to figure out how to make things happen. Sometimes there's complete disorder and confusion. Nobody's talking to anybody. And you may find out, like how many have had this happen where they find out later that somebody's working on the same project from a different direction? Has anybody ever experienced that? So, yeah, so there's individual impact that people can have when people start realizing, oh, this is kind of a movement. There's a bunch of us that are working on it. And then you can start coordinating, and then you end up like, oh, okay, yep, we're all, yeah, are you doing that? Yeah, you're doing that. The difference is if you take collective impact, you unify that much more strongly. So in these complex systems, you need leadership from all of these different various partners, state government, funding agencies, schools, hospitals, private sectors, areas that you may not necessarily consider part of a food system, but they all play a part. So I'm going to be giving a few examples of different kinds of collective impact projects that I've seen totally work. I think that structure should also get involved more in what we do as food system advocates. It's really pretty common in healthcare systems. Many of you may recognize some of the terminology that I use. It's kind of some of it's hot button buzzwords now, but it also really reflects what I saw yesterday in the ABI training. It's really reflects the indigenous worldviews of aligning everybody working together, having the worldview that everything is connected and working together and working for each other. So let me see here. It's a way of working together successfully. So how I got involved in this the first time was with map of the Southern Kenai Peninsula. It's a community health organization, community health. So public health came in and said they were going to organize this community health collaboration. And they walked us through a parameter little strategic planning session, and everybody threw it out. They said, you know what, we want to hear each other's stories. We don't want to play the game of walking through the strategic planning without having heard each other's stories. And we had about 40 different organizations in the room. And when we started talking together, it really became clear that there were pieces of data, community understanding that we just didn't have. And then there was also assumptions that people were running on that were unfounded, that others knew were unfounded, but others were running completely with the belief system of. And then there were lots of people working on the same kind of things, just in different empty directions or different silos. So I started looking at ways that we could start working together. And in that system, we started identifying ways to organize ourselves, and collective impact was one of the ones that caught our eye. It was originally named in a Stanford study, but it was highlighting, the Stanford study highlighted a group where they were working in the schools to lower truancy. And truancy is a big problem in a high school. For example, kids don't go to school. How do you keep them in school? The school counselor is the one that's got that job, right? It's one person, and they can't do that job without a bunch of collaboration. Well, when they started collaborating in the community, like the police force said, well, I pick them up and they seem to me like they don't have anything better to do. And the counselor said, well, I know that they have a terrible time at home. Well, I know, as people started discussing, they started drawing a picture of a student who was having a lot of trauma issues, and expelling them from school or suspending them from school did not make it a better situation. So they had to revamp entire paradigms of ways to deal with students that have problems in school. And that paradigm shift totally changed all of the truancy problems. So a little paradigm shift by getting everybody together. The police stopped arresting them. The police would take them back to school, and instead of calling their parents, would take them back to school and make them stay in school. Like, there were different ways that each participant throughout the whole community participated. And in the end, the students felt heard, and they felt like they were having a support system instead of being castigated for doing the wrong thing all the time. And so their personal awareness of the situation was heightened, and they were able to work on their issues better with a lot of support. So being able to identify issues, it's not always difficult. Often there's just a key, but it's when everybody's working together that it really makes a big difference. Now in the food systems, I'm always hammering with a lot of the people that I work with, bring in those extra, the people that you may not think of as normally a collaborator. And in the food system, I know one of my favorite stories was in Kodiak. I think it was the Chamber of Commerce that really had an impact with gardens at work sites. They convinced different employers to allow their employees to go out and work in the gardens during their lunch breaks. Well, the employees loved it because they got a break outside, and the community that was able to collect that food also benefited. So unique individuals can provide a huge key that we might not think about. So
I just had a thought on all that, Khara, and
yeah.
When you're talking about a paradigm shift, I just wanted to clarify that for me at least, that's meaning shifting away from this linear response to things. So thinking about cause and response, say the kid skipped school, and so now we must put them in detention, and that's the linear response, whereas the collective impact model allows us to engage in more of a systems perspective. So scoping out a bit beyond just like, here's the cause and the effect, but thinking about like, what are all the factors influencing this behavior of the student? And what are all the ways that we can leverage support systems and maybe address the contributors to the negative behavior. And that's how you really can see or accomplish behavior change. And I think many of us know that, and it's how we achieve system change rather And when working with complex social issues, such as food security, or any of the subcategories under food security, food waste, or food distribution, I think you really need that systems perspective. Many of the challenges that we're being faced with as a society are a result of this, linear model and strive towards efficiency. Thanks, I think it was Henry Ford, right, who introduced that model and that hyper specialization, and took away the kind of the generalized specialty or generalized approach to, say, car production and having a person that mastered many skills versus singular skill sets and plugging them in as part of the machine, so to speak.
Exactly. Well said. And that is the huge paradigm shift that we are talking about here. How do you connect in instead of looking only in that linear fashion? So collective impact, I'm going to start describing the structure a little bit. It's not a complicated structure, but there are 5 aspects, and they're all super important. I've worked with a collective impact organization for since about 10 years now, and we have struggled with different ones of these points. And let me tell you, they do have a lot of weight. Each one is very important, and they are interconnected. So if any of them start faltering, the whole system feels a little bit wobblier. But if you can pull off all of these, they're all really important. There's common agenda, shared measurement, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and backbone support. I'll cover each of these, but first of all, a common agenda, that seems really obvious. Common agenda is you've all got to be on the same page. You've all got to be in agreement that that's the direction you want to go. If we're talking about the situation with food security, it's going to be pretty clear. We want more local food production and creation instead of importing food. More, whether it's access to subsistence resources, access to ground so that we can grow more, or whatever that looks like. That common agenda is food security in Alaska. So that's a pretty good and easy common agenda. But shared
If I can
measurement,
jump in real quick on
yeah.
common agenda, I'm just thinking back to our conversation when we were nerding out about this in person, and that tool that I shared.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
The tool that I shared in that conversation, I wanted to share with the larger group in part of this change, setting a shared vision, right? Like, so when I think common agenda, I think shared vision, like where are we going? What direction are we moving as a group? And so when I think about a system, every system, whether it's our daily habits or our family routines or organizational cultures, or, the phrase that we all know, well, why are we doing it this way? Well, it's because we've always done it this way, right? That's the resistance that exists within any system that's established. But to overcome that resistance, you need to first have dissatisfaction. So in this case, we're saying we want to change the fact that 95% of our food is imported to the state. That's our dissatisfaction. That scares us. We are worried about the supply chain interruption. We don't want to have that happen. And then the vision is we want to see that statistic change. But if you're working as a collective impact group, that common agenda, you would need to put the numbers to that, and we'll get to that with the shared measurement. Like, how are we going to measure that vision of we want to change this statistic, 95% imported food? And then within that, you also need next steps. And so the X's represent multiplication. So if you're missing any of these categories, if you go back to algebra days, dissatisfaction times vision for the future times next steps. If any of those aren't present, you're going to have a sum of 0, and that energy is less than the resistance that exists in the system. So you won't overcome it. We'll just continue doing it the same way. And we've been part of projects and been part of efforts, whether it's in our own life or in our own businesses or organizations or working together with other organizations, where there's a lot of momentum at first, but then it falls flat. And it's usually because you're missing something. Maybe there wasn't actually dissatisfaction with the status quo, the things that were happening, or maybe you didn't take the time to step back and create that shared vision, or maybe there wasn't clarity in the next steps. you can usually root out those projects that kind of fell flat and stopped having any sort of momentum or energy through the lack of one of those key elements and setting a shared vision. Thanks for that.
Oh yeah, that's totally on. And that's a perfect example. Like if we look at Alaska in the last 2 years, dissatisfaction with our food system has skyrocketed, right? Like a lot of us who worked in the food system in Alaska have been grumbling about 95% imports for a long time, but then you have COVID and supply chains start breaking down and everybody starts getting dissatisfied. And so then you start getting like declarations in the legislature and the governor, and so suddenly there's a lot more support. Yeah, well said, Tika. So the next part is about shared measurement. And this is where somebody like me, who's a total data geek, and maybe Sue Bence, we're going to sit there and rally for the data. But the fact is that if you don't have good information and solid numbers about where you're at now, it's hard to measure that you're improving. And so that's one of those things, like when Tikon's talking about dissatisfaction, if the status quo is good enough, or if you're trying to show that, oh, we need to move forward, and the difference between 95% of our food imported and 96% of our food imported isn't very tangible, then it's not very motivating. It's hard to, you might not see a difference, and so it's not very motivating. But if you have numbers, sometimes it's a little easier to motivate people. Hey, we made 96, or I say lowered it. We made 94, percent, or we made 75% of our food is now imported. If we could make a number like that shift, then that's huge, and it can really motivate people to have a goal. And when you have people working from very disparate sectors of our economy and our government trying to work on these things together, to have that shared measurement, this is what we're going for. We've already shared the vision. Now, if we can measure it and show it, we can hopefully keep that energy going and that motivation going. Kind of like those thermometers they have in fundraisers, like United Way, we made a certain amount of our goal. So having a shared measurement that everybody agrees is valid is a really important thing to work on.
And I think, that old adage of you can't change what you don't measure, right? And so taking the time to really consider, what it is that you're measuring and how it's contributing to that shared common agenda, that shared vision, is vitally important to this process. And like, it's that kind of the groundwork. This is all the groundwork to like get you really rolling as a collaborative kind of team and building those bridges cross-sectorally. So I also think about the example, of like the Alaska Grown effort, the $5 challenge, right? That was like a simple measurement with the vision of like getting more people to engage with buying local produce and local available goods. And there was a simple measurement, and it was the slogan of the campaign. So it was like super, a super successful campaign from what I can see. Yeah,
exactly. And one of the things in one of my groups that my MAP steering committee, where we have collective impact is one of our goals, one of our collaborators will always say, and you got to celebrate. So when you make that $5 challenge, you should celebrate. Usually reinforcing activities. It's not just about throwing a party when you make the right percent goal that you're looking for, but that can be part of it. Making sure that you recognize that you have a bunch of diverse stakeholders involved here, and when things work out, that you're all working on the same page, make sure you highlight those things. So the Alaska Food Policy Council Conference, I'm sorry, this is perfect. This is exactly what that is. We're all coming in and we're showing each other what's being done around the state. And that is why this conference is so energizing for me, because I can see that, oh, I am just a microcosm in a much larger thing, and it's happening. So having those mutually reinforcing activities, coordinating different activities, communicating strongly. I know the MAP steering committee that I work with, when we first got started, our coordinator would insist that we have announcements between the different organizations at the beginning. And me being an, time crunch, time focused person, I was like, you know what, this takes too much time. Can't we just skip announcements and move on? And she always insisted that we keep the announcements part. We need to know what each other's doing. And honestly, 10 years later, that's why I still attend those meetings, because I want to know what's going on with everybody, because we have learned that there's so many things we can connect on, even across very disparate groups. For example, in this committee of community health organizers, there's the hospital, there's the community health agency, but there's also the college, and there's a pastor from a Methodist church, and there's the planning commissioner from the city. You know, there's a whole bunch of people that are in sectors that I wouldn't necessarily have any connection to, and yet we're all talking together about the same shared agenda and talking about our measurements and our mutually reinforcing activities. So if I'm doing something that, for example, the farmers market has a token program, turns out the hospital now gives tokens as rewards if you do certain procedures at the hospital. Come on in and get a colonoscopy and get $20 worth of Homer bucks, Homer farmers market bucks. Sounds silly, but it turns out to be great. And it turns out that when I started talking about how our farmers have CSA boxes, one of the directors at the hospital had never heard of a CSA box, but then the hospital started sponsoring CSA boxes for their employees. Like they actually sponsored a portion of an employee's purchase. So things like that totally impacted our little local food system here. So if we hadn't been sharing that information about what our activities were, we wouldn't have been able to start cross-sectoring them like that. So that's what leads. Do you have anything to add to that one, Tikan?
Well, just, those are where the aha moments come from, right? You've come together under that common agenda and you're reporting out on the measurements that you're all like paying attention to, but you're all also doing your own work within each of your sectors that might not relate to all that. But sometimes just in those general updates, it's like, wait, you're doing what? How are you doing that? Can I plug in? And it just totally makes sense, for someone in the working group to want to plug in with, or it's exactly what they're looking for. So
Exactly.
It's identifying those assets through that mutual reinforced activities and leverage points.
Right. And I should emphasize that this is one of those points where funding often comes in. Like our group ended up, about 10 of the organizations that are connected to the steering committee applied for a trauma-informed grant. And each agency had to implement trauma-informed practices at their agency, not related to the other agencies. So each one identified them in different ways. Like our family planning clinic realized that their clinical rooms weren't as private as they should be. Like when you open the door, you could be looking at somebody in a gown, and somebody in the hallway behind you could be looking at that person in the gown. So they put in screens and protectors so they wouldn't be triggering people who had issues, So that was one way to address it. And at our hospital, they started to look at the emergency room, lots of trauma there, right? But then they realized our staff is dealing with tons of secondary trauma. So they ended up putting in a meditation room and asking staff about other activities that they would like to have. And the staff actually selected to create a position for a person who calls hospital clients after they've gone home to check in and see if they're okay. Because that's one of the traumas that nurses and doctors deal with, is worrying about people after they leave and they're out of their control. So just activities like that were identified on each and every organizational basis and had a huge impact across our community. And yet, like no one person could have identified what each agency needed to do. They did it on their own, and it was a beautiful thing. So yeah, those aha moments is a good way to put it. The continuous communication thing is huge, and that's those meetings on a regular basis. The MAP steering committee, believe it or not, meets twice a month for 2 hours each time. So these are large organizations that are dedicating 4 hours a month to checking in and talking about projects and programs that they can make happen around the community. What are the community needs, and how are we going to address them? So when COVID hit, the community of Homer had pop-ups almost immediately, had testing as soon as it was available, had vaccines as soon as it was available. It was a quick action and easy response because all of the agencies were already communicating together, and the city offered up locations and personnel, to handle traffic in some of these pop-up events that they held through the hospital. Various collaborators working on different things. A pretty amazing scenario when it was put on the ground. But as far as like community activities, we have had quite a few that were connected because of our continuous communication. So
I think the continuous communication also really contributes to the building of trust, right? And then also it's an opportunity for sharing out the measurements and revisiting the agenda. Like, are we still connected to the common agenda? Is this what we need to work towards, or has this working group identified a deeper root cause? Like, maybe we were just scratching the surface, and now through our continuous communication and the trust that we have in each other, by connecting, we can actually start diving into maybe a problem that's a little more scoped out or more focused, depending on what the need is.
Right, exactly. And mutual respect can be an interesting conversation when you have agencies who maybe aren't all friends. Like, let's be honest, not every agency gets along with every other agency, right? And so it has been interesting in my years of working with this, that having that constant communication and learning, okay, that's the person behind the desk. It's not just an acronym for an agency. You start getting to know people, and then a lot of those issues that have been hot button issues in the past, they start getting addressed, and but they get addressed in a more mutually respectful way, because you have to face that person. It's not like a Facebook troll that can just throw out any kind of insult they want to. It does encourage that straight up communication with respect, because you have to work with this person. You now see that this person is part of your system, and it's no longer me against them. It's much more inclusive, and keeps that balance between agencies. I've seen it where a person at an agency that had a bad reputation was able to advocate for more staff, because all of the other agencies that were like, you guys aren't doing your job. And the person was like, I can't do more. So then all of those other agencies could hit their hierarchy and encourage more staff to be supplied. And it was a beautiful thing. So it's a different way, rather than that linear way, but an all-inclusive way of addressing strife when it does come up. Backbone support. This one is really important, and I'm noticing that over the years, funding has started following this concept. It used to be that you couldn't get funding for backbone support, but it's so vital, and it's been shown to be so important when it comes to, again, that long-term cohesion of a group like this. You can have a lot of enthusiasm at the beginning, but it needs to have somebody who can act as an independent funded staff who is dedicated to the initiative and support carrying that initiative's vision, the strategies, supporting the aligned activities, connecting people, establishing that shared management practices, even reaching out to the public and building public will, mobilizing resources, all of that. It's nice if there's one independent funded staff that can, maybe two, as many as possible, getting some funded staff to hold the space for this group to continue. That way you can get those larger, more influential people from, say, a hospital or a government agency to participate, because they know it's not adding to their plate. There's somebody who's going to hold that space for them and allow them to give their updates and talk about their projects, and will remind them when the meeting's coming and what to bring and what to prepare for. And yet they won't be carrying extra work and an extra project along with that. Any other ideas or comments on that backbone concept?
Yeah, I really just think it's the value add, right, of the whole process. It's so important, for that consistency in communication, for making sure that the measurement is happening and the reporting. There is some admin work that goes along with coordinating a strong work group, and like the follow-up items that come up that are specific to, say, the logistics of coming together, or developing a report to communicate out to the public of the accomplishments or something. Everyone's coming together from their own sectors and want to take value from this collective impact structure by contributing basically what they're doing already without too much extra. So that, and that's just the truth, right? And so that the backbone support is so essential to kind of just executing some of the administrative meeting coordination, reporting, all that stuff for the group. I think, in also thinking about the group, funding is really important. Do we touch on that a little bit, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so that really is the main message here. And the reason I see that it differs from your average collaborative project, I can't count how many people who come to me and say, hey, I've got a project. Do you want to join my project? Do you want to do my thing? Do you want to join my grant and do my project? And if I can, I do. But sometimes I just don't have the time because I got so many other things on my plate. But collective impact, it's collective. It's the collective impact that we all have with what we're doing. So when we all align, not linearly, but we all align on the same direction, then you can have that impact without putting the weight on the participants. It's actually everyone working together for a common cause, but that does not mean ownership. It doesn't mean pride and domination. It's allowing each participant to do whatever they do, however they do it. So it's a form of mutual respect. That's why I say it so aligns with the Indigenous worldview that we talked about yesterday. And funders do like that. And I think I saw Heidi had pointed out that funders do like innovative projects, and innovative projects with lots of partners. When they start seeing, oh, wow, all of these people are working together or in the same direction, it can have a huge impact on your funders, as well as just a huge impact on your community and on your goal. But again, it's not taking ownership. Like one of the things we've had a common conversation about with our MAP steering committee is not branding it. It's not a MAP project, it's a community project. And making sure that from the very beginning is part of the goal, is not taking a brand name, not putting a stamp on it. Because when you start doing that, and there's even that backbone, the backbone isn't meant to take ownership of it, because the psychology behind that becomes then, oh, they're taking care of that, I don't need to worry about it. Whereas collective impact, the idea is you're trying to get everybody to say, oh, what do I do that would affect that? And how could I participate in moving towards that shared measurement, that shared goal of, say, reducing the 95% imports or whatever that is, So if I think it was in a presentation I saw earlier today, or maybe it was Eva, I don't remember, but it's been too much. But the idea that if you grow a garden, you're bringing that down. You're bringing that part of that down. So the idea that we can make that go away. The idea that we can all work together and all have our own responsibilities in our own worlds, and yet participate in this larger thing, be part of the collective impact. That's the idea.
Thinking about funding and like the opportunities that exist within funding, and a newer grant that's out there is that RISE grant, Rural Innovative Stronger Economy grants, right? And I just put it in the chat, but if you had a collective model implemented in multiple different sectors working towards the goal of supporting youth development or like an incubator around food, like a food hub incubator or multiple food efforts to address food security within a community, I think something like the RISE grant would apply, because then you start to see all the multi-sectors collaborating, and you have the measurement in place. And so, like I think USDA is starting to recognize like the limitations of some of the opportunities and expanding those opportunities through like the RISE grant or the rural, the food RSPC, Rural Food System Partnership. There we go. that we've been working with AFPC. Like that's again another thinking about like how can we work as a collective to strategize and plan and really put measurements in place that will help us accomplish the goals around such big, challenging systems work. Regional food system partnership. There we go. Said rural. Thank you, Robbie.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about trust at that point, building that trust and building over time those relationships. Again, this conference doesn't hurt in moving us better and closer in that direction. But there are stages that you go through as you're developing. So it's not necessarily an overnight process, but all of it is important, and all of it creates that culture of trust that creates the culture of change. Yeah. Do you want to go over these, Tikan?
Yeah, so it doesn't happen overnight, right? It's a slow process. So you create that common agenda and you put the 5 elements into place. You identify the backbone, you have a common agenda, you start communicating. But it's not just gonna you're not gonna see change immediately. You'll go through stages, and this is one framework of thinking about the stages that you might go through as a working group or as a collective working towards a common goal. At first you're exploring it. Like, what is the issue? What is happening? What are the factors? What are we dissatisfied about? So you're exploring, you've come together because there's something out there, it's under your skin, or there's a challenge that you've all sort of identified, but you might have it framed differently. You might be thinking about, different outcomes or different elements related to the same topic, say food security. But by stepping into that explore stage, you start to crystallize and have a deeper understanding of what it is that is impacting and contributing to it. So, and what the true issue is that that the collective would be working towards. And then you start emerging as the tag here, and you're talking about the outcome. So as a result of that issue, what outcomes are we seeing? Are we seeing higher obesity rates, negative health outcomes because the food being imported is processed, or the lack of access of healthy foods, or maybe contaminated waters and lands is impacting our traditional food harvests, and so that's contributing to health outcomes. So just thinking about the outcomes and then relating it back to that original cause be the next step, to making those connections between what you're going to do and the issue that you've identified. And then the next step is really, and these are over usually multiple conversations, multiple meetings, a period of time. So again, not rushing, but then you start to identify the data. What data is available? What data can we collect? What data would be meaningful that we can't get? And really looking to what you can measure and how it will support the change that you need. Again, you can't measure, or you can't change what you don't measure. You need to be able to keep that momentum or that excitement going by seeing tangible movement and reporting on that. And then finally, you start to realize that systems change. You are using the data, you have the data, you've identified the outcomes that you're looking to affect, the issue. So what are the resources that each of your organization can provide and offer to really move that statistic, make change within the system that you're trying to address change into? And then sometimes, and then you kind of go through it all again. It can almost be cyclical, right? You accomplish a good amount of change and maybe you get to there, but you're still recognizing there's need for work or continued effort on the broader issue. And so you come back together and say, okay, well, what is the broader issue? And what ideas do we now have now that we understand our resources and we've been measuring this data, or maybe the data has highlighted challenges or issues that you didn't even understand prior to beginning that measurement process, because data trended over time usually reveals things that we're unaware by having our snapshots of perception, whether in our daily lives or kind of our progress on collective models and work.
Exactly. I know with the organization I've been talking about, when we first started, we did a huge community survey and we identified that our connection between the agencies that work on drug abuse and domestic violence weren't communicating very well. So that was our first iteration of working together, was trying to build those bridges. Then we did another community-wide data collection and survey, and we recognized with more information, we're dealing with a lot of trauma in the community. And then we started working on that issue for the next 3 years. And then we did another data collection, and we realized, you know, there's a lot of resiliency factors that are built into our community too. Maybe we should switch our perspective and change, move in that direction. And so, like Tikan said, it's cyclical. We always were going back and checking in and touching base. And each time we tweaked it a little bit as to which direction we went. And each time it got more meaningful and more meaningful. So it kept the energy going and kept that focus on the successes and what worked best.
So important to focus on the successes, I think, you know, just just framing it in that positive way to maintain the momentum. So important.
Mm-hmm.
Because progress occurs at the speed of trust, and trust takes a long time to build, right? And if you're always focused on the negative or pointing out where things aren't working, you know, maybe that puts people's defenses up. Maybe people feel challenged, like they're personally responsible for, say, a negative statistic that you've chosen to measure. And so again, bringing it back to that measurement is really important to determine what to measure and how it'll impact the overall project. And choosing things positively, I think I saw in the chat, you know, maybe it's too hard to measure import of food at 95%. It's too big, too much. And so what if we, I think a suggestion I saw was, well, let's measure pounds of produce grown in the state, or number of dollars sold by farmers, by local producers. That's something we can celebrate. That's something we go, yay, that is amazing. Let's do more of that, right? And that's just a shift. Like, oh no, we're importing too much food, or yay, we're buying so much local food. I mean, the narrative is different, and it's important.
That's exactly true. And one of those things, and this is a shout out to Sue Benson, the ag statistics for the state, we can measure that. We know that we have that statistic. So pick a statistic that's easy to measure. We know that the number of direct sales to consumers skyrocketed between 2012 and 2017. Let's make sure that stays high. Let's keep that growing, you know? And so those are the kinds of things that we can measure. I like what Claire said here in the chat about how it does require organizational humility. It does, that trust is built not by a bunch of people bragging, but all of us celebrating all of our collective successes.
I think we had a couple of questions for the audience, and maybe kind of a 10-minute discussion opportunity to close out this this presentation. And so we've introduced the big collective impact model and the framework to utilize it, you know, and did anybody have any aha moments or ideas of how this can be adopted into frameworks that exist in Alaska? Or really any of these questions, feel free to raise your hand. We'll come off mute, you know, we'll call on you or throw it in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. Let's use our collective brain power here.
The chat's been going crazy. I love it. So thank you guys. I haven't had a chance to read them all, but shout out.
Or any questions for us, clarifications that we can offer. Happy to take those questions as well.
I just thought it was really interesting that, you know, the idea of not branding, when I feel like there's so much pressure to brand and, you know, social media and all of that. And then also in academia where, you know, I'm at the university and take credit for. So that's a really interesting concept that I like. And especially with grant projects, you know, you brand it for 3 years and then you're on to something new. So that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah. And it's a good one to be able to explain to a funder. We're not going to do branding. We're going to empower the community in this project, or we have too many participants, so we can't brand it. We want to make sure everybody is able to own this when they go back to their communities or whatever it may be. Yes, Leonardo.
Hello. I just wanted to mention that we've been working with the National Tribal Emergency Management Council on some 15 emergency support functions that affect our communities and the national response framework. And one of them is, food security. And so, they've been working with a organization called Farmer Frog out of Washington on, and part of it's this Fresh Food Coalition that they've are a part of as well. And it's basically, it's, empowering farmers and our communities to get, fresh fruit out to communities that need it and at the time that they're, while it's still fresh. And so it's really great model and organization. And they've commissioned me to start the Alaska chapter of the National Tribal Emergency Management Council. So we're working to, continue to grow our network and grow our community. And we're involved in an emergency response to a 9.0 earthquake. It's called Thunderbird and Whale. It's down in Washington, but we're hoping to include, Alaska in this. Alaska's going to be a part of it. It's just a matter of who wants to be involved. And so, they were involved in distributing a lot of food throughout all of America and including Alaska. So anyways, I wanted to just kind of mention that we're looking to, continue to expand our networks. And this is a great presentation and you guys are doing a great job. And I just wanted to, mention that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Leonardo. Yeah, the application is, really in any sectors. And I think you'll see that collaboration from Alaska come if there is dissatisfaction, right, with the same issue of that emergency response to, the level 9 sort of earthquake. And so that's where I would start that conversation or that outreach. Are you dissatisfied? Well, we're working towards a solution. If you are, that sort of conversation.
Right. And that's a perfect example, because for example, if you're working by yourself, maybe the conclusion you're going to come up with is we need a warehouse of MREs to have food security in Alaska during an earthquake, right? When what we really need for food security is to empower everybody to have food sovereignty, know where it's coming from, grow it themselves, be able to find it themselves and access it themselves. That's a very different story. And you probably wouldn't take that on as one organization. But if there's a bunch of us up here that are working to increase production and make it available in the case of emergency, totally changes the story and the direction that you take. For bringing that up. And keep posted, keep in touch.
Thinking about, just that the linear model, of food production is gone, right? So basically, Western approaches to agriculture right now is it's closer to mining, than stewardship. But the regenerative ag models and the traditional stewardship that we see by tribal people is more of this systems thinking about the food web and the interconnectedness of, all things, right? We're all related and it's all connected. But it's that linear approach that is driven by our larger corporations, which again are driven by many, when they're publicly traded, shareholders and the need to accomplish profits. And so it's this constant drive towards efficiency. How can we cut corners or make this more efficient to realize greater profits? And even like the organizations, corporations that get founded maybe under a social cause, the moment they're publicly traded, it's responsibility to the shareholders. So no matter what, it's going to be undercut by that linear decision making. How do we maximize profits? So I think about like small scale production here in Alaska, and when we decentralize the food system, it's these smaller farms, it's locally produced farms. And in many models, you see farmers engaging with like a CSA, and that helps to guarantee a certain amount of income at the beginning of the season, right? So they have so many CSA members, they get that installment of funds, and it helps to stabilize their operational budget. But the reality of trying to produce a bunch of specialized crops each season to meet those demands is really challenging. What if you had a collective of farmers who were each focused on, you know, one specific crop, and they were getting really good at, say, growing kale or potatoes and carrots, and they were contributing to this larger CSA. You know, and that would be an approach to, say, utilizing the collective impact model for production sustainability within the state.
Yeah, it's come up several times during this conference, and it's super inspiring to hear about concepts of Alaskan permaculture, what that looks like. What could Nenana-Tulchakit's ag project look like if you didn't enforce that everybody take out the forest, but instead also included that they use the forest, you know, things like that, really valuing more long-term different kinds of agriculture, so we're not doing exactly the same stupid mistakes we already did in the lower 48 and on the rest of the planet, you know. So if we have people that can bring in information about proper techniques for soil conservation, that can bring in native ways of knowing, of uses of things that you can do with the products of the forest and the different habitats, that keep those habitats intact, so then you can have wild harvest of other things like moose and such. So all of that involves environmental organizations, that involves scientists, it involves nutritionists, it involves the native community and the people in the area that know your area the best. It includes a huge conglomeration of people. I also like to quickly answer to Liza Eller mentioned the thin line between owning it and having a backbone organization. I totally get that, but it's much easier to have an organization, an amalgamation, a collective impact group, and then hire somebody to do the emails. You know, you don't have to put a name on that. Our MAP organization hired a contractor, and when she has a lot of work organizing some of the work groups and stuff that pop off of our various ideas and our different projects, she just brings in more people into her consulting firm. So we actually have as many as 3 people working to keep this functioning as a backbone. But she is not, like, nobody would be able to tell you what the name of her organization is. It's just a thing on her taxes that she has a private company. But MAP is seen as a community organization, kind of amorphous, but it's a conglomeration. So yeah, trying not to, it's seen as an organization that holds community meetings 4 times a year. And so that's the kind of the reputation that if you are going to have a reputation associated with you, you're known as the ones who bring everybody together, not that you're the one that solves problems, because each organization is solving those problems in their way.
That's, I think, a great place to end, and we're right at time. But we have a 15-minute break, so if anybody wants to chat with us, I'm happy to hang around for a little longer. But right,
Thank
Heidi,
you both so much. That was very inspiring. And yep, thanks, TCON. We do have a 15-minute break, but if you guys want to stick around and chat, that would be great too. Thanks.